Good evening. Welcome to this session on BEPS. In order to we are starting a bit late, but we'll try to cover up. In order to facilitate international trade and investment, countries had intent to double taxation agreements. However, with globalization and especially spread of internet has enabled multinational companies to locate their business in various countries. They control and manage operations from one country and locate business and operate in various countries away from the locations services are delivered. Aggressive tax planning has resulted in less or no tax being paid by many companies. This has resulted in base erosion and profit shifting, or BEPS. To tackle this BEPS, at the request of G20, OECD has evolved a 15-point action plan, of which some conclusions and recommendations have already been finalized, and others are likely to be finalized by end of this year. There has been a need to balance the requirements of countries between the suppliers and recipients of capital and technology, and demands for residence or source-based taxation. The work of OECD working group is not confined only to OECD or G20 countries, but a very large number of developing countries have also been in part of this deliberation. There will be challenges in implementing the outcome of action plan while reconciling the needs of various countries. One major concern could be some unilateral action taken by some countries by enacting legislations to address the issues of BEPS may create disruption. Today we have three eminent speakers in this, Mr. Rafal Russo, Head of BEPS Project at OECD, Mr. Akhilesh Ranjan, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Finance, and Mr. Jayesh Singhvi from E&Y. I'll request Mr. Russo to start his keynote address. Yeah, please.
Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chair, fellow panelists. It is better with the microphone, I would assume. It is a sincere pleasure to be here. As those of you that know me personally, it's always exciting for me to be in India, and in particular in Delhi. And I'm here today to talk about BEPS and the implementation challenges of this project. So what we thought with the fellow panelists was that I will just run through the origins of the project, where we are at the moment, and where we plan to be in the near and medium-term future, and then have a discussion with the panelists and with those of you that would feel interested in asking questions or making comments. So if I start from what is BEPS, which stands for Base Erosion and Profit Shifting, it basically relates to all those instances where, because of the existing rules on the taxation of cross-border activities, it is possible to artificially segregate the taxable income from the location where the activities take place and value is created. So from the jurisdictions where these profits arise, these profits end up in places where they usually pay no or little tax. So why did we launch the BEPS project? Because it was clear to most that there was a need to update the rules for the taxation of multinationals. In a world that is increasingly interconnected, digitalized, we were still applying rules that were designed at the beginning of the previous century, and that were perceived by many, particularly in countries that faced a severe budget and fiscal crisis, as unfair. Imagine countries that in the last few years had to increase VAT or consumption taxes or individual income taxes. And so like ordinary citizens paying more, while at the same time reading stories on effectively all the newspapers, all the media around the world about multinationals not paying their fair share of tax. So there was a pressing need to make sure that the framework that we have had in place, which is a framework that is there to avoid double taxation, to avoid that if someone invests abroad, pays taxes twice, and therefore constitutes an impediment to cross-border trade and investment. Well, the system that prevents double taxation cannot be the system that allows double non-taxation, or what some people have referred to as stateless income. And therefore, from a very technical topic, I have never been able to explain properly to my brother, for example, what I did until BEPS came in, and then it became something of public domain. So we moved away from the tax technical discussions into a political debate. Why a political debate? Because it is about trust of citizens in the system. It is about the integrity of the system itself, and also about economic efficiency. If you think that the largest bond offer in the history has been made by a company that has about 100 billion in cash, and this is purely for tax reasons, it's evidence of the fact that the system that we have creates economic distortions. It is also a matter of equality, because companies, however large, that operate only in one market, however big, are at a competitive disadvantage compared to companies that, by exploiting lack of coordination among the rules of different countries or standards that were not strong enough at the international level, are able to lower their tax payments. Where are we in the project now? We launched it 2 years ago. Was July 2013, and effectively in September 2013 we launched this project, which sees for the first time OECD and G20 countries on an equal footing. We delivered the first set of outputs in September 2014, and we are actually getting closer and closer to deliver the full package of measures in time for the G20 finance ministers meeting of the 8th of October in Lima, and subsequently to the G20 leaders in Turkey in November. At the same time, because we never stop, we are already thinking about what happens next. And that's what we will be talking about at length today. So what's the BEPS project in like 3 keywords? It's fast pace. 2 years is not a lot to do what we are trying to do. It is inclusive. As I said, first time in the history of international tax policy that OECD and G20 countries are all together on an equal footing. Same rights, same obligations. We are talking about soft law, but that counts. We have an increasing number of developing countries that are engaged in the project. Some of them come and participate into the meetings directly. Others engage and provide input via a number of regional networks that we have created in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, and in Central and Eastern Europe. And it is a transparent project. I don't think we could have been more transparent than we have been in the last 2 years. We have published 23 discussion drafts on almost each topic of the BEP, of the 15 items of the BEPS project. We published the discussion drafts. We got 11,000 pages of comments from stakeholders, business, advisors, academia, NGOs, civil society. And we held 14 public consultations in Paris, where we basically discussed these comments, and where representatives of governments were able to talk to stakeholders about the concerns that had been expressed and how to fix them. So what are we going to see in the package that we will be delivering in October? A number of different things that I have categorized, as you can see on the slide. First, data and economic analysis. One thing that was very clear from the beginning of the project is data are very scarce. There are no reliable data available out there. That's a fact. That's a reality we face. Now, this reality can be used by some to say, so why are you doing it if you don't even know what you're talking about? And others saying, well, it's so big that we're talking about, I don't know, 25 trillion tax lost per year. Probably the truth is somewhere in between. But there is a lot of anecdotal evidence of the fact that BEPS is going on. And sometimes what we had started doing before the BEPS project was actually to share intelligence on a number of common planning schemes. And we are talking about schemes like single transactions in the order of billions, just to give you an idea. Now, after 2 years of work, we will be able to come out with a rough estimate, with the range of the corporate tax that is lost because of BEPS, recognizing that because of the limitations on the data that are available, we may be well talking about the lower bound of what the actual range is. Second, reinforced international standards in relation to double tax treaties and to transfer pricing. So in relation to double tax treaties, what we will deliver to the G20 is a number of different measures and political statements that clarify that double tax treaties are there to avoid double taxation, are not there to create double non-taxation or to favor avoidance structures. And those of you that know the situation in India may already think about which are the countries with which India may have this issue, or islands probably, with which India has this issue at the moment. There what you see is agreement among the 44 countries, OECD, G20 plus the developing countries, that there should be a minimum standard included in all bilateral treaties that ensures that only the true residents of a country benefit from the treaty network of that country. And cases where I would call up my tax advisor, I should have told you that I was a tax advisor before. So these are the things that I used to do in the past, but it was also a different world. And you would call up someone and say, look, I have a client that has to do an investment in country A, but if the client does it directly because the client is based, say, in Cayman Island, they would have to pay 30% withholding tax in country A. I say, well, no problem. You know, we set up a company in country B, and then country B company will invest in country A, and because there is a treaty, there will be no tax in the country of the investment. That's going to be over. Permanent establishment definition. This is a threshold. This is something that basically says we have rules according to which the profits of an enterprise are taxable in the state of residence of the enterprise, unless the enterprise passes a threshold, which is the permanent establishment definition. Why? Because the idea is once you become so involved into the economic life of another country, and therefore you have passed the threshold, you should contribute to the public expenses of this country, because you are using the infrastructure, you're using the legal system, etc., etc., etc. Now, this definition has been in many instances circumvented or read very literally in a very legalistic way, and I should also disclose that I'm a lawyer. And at the same time, it's a definition that has not always kept pace with the developments in the world economy. To give you an example, this definition says that if you have a warehouse in another country, that warehouse, even though it would be a permanent establishment according to the main rule, benefits from an exception. Why? Because the thinking in the past was, yes, because, you know, how much profits can you attach to a warehouse? Not much, so let's not bother. But in the world in which we live today, having a warehouse close to where the customers are located may actually become core in the business model of that enterprise. You would not buy a widget online if you have to wait for 30 days for the widget to come to your place. Permanent establishment definition modified to address these situations. Finally, transfer pricing, which is basically the rule according to which two parties of the same multinational group should transact with each other. And the rule, like the genesis of the rule, is an anti-abuse rule. Why? Because if I am in one country and the gentleman there is in another country and I have to pay 50% tax and he pays no tax for whatever reason, I may have an incentive when we deal with each other and we are part of the same group to say, well, he's paying me very little. so that I declare as least as possible and he declares as much as possible. Why? Because I pay 50%, he pays 0%. So we have rules that say, no, you have to transact as if you were independent. But again, these rules may have been applied in the past or may have been read in the past, and the guidance attached thereto in a very formalistic way. In particular, if you think about intangibles, where do we put the profits that are allocated to intangibles? Well, someone would have said, probably a few years ago, well, it's where the legal ownership of the intangible is. But I can still call my same tax advisor and say, okay, let's shift the legal ownership of the intangible into this company in Bermuda without moving anything. Why? Because it's intangibles. Same with risks. I can say, look, you are doing something for me, but you have no risk. And all your risk is insured by the company in the group, which is in a no tax jurisdiction. So basically all these situations where contractually you pretend that legally assets, in particular intangibles and risks, are allocated somewhere else than where they actually are from an economic point of view. Again, we have fixed that. And in relation to intangibles, we have also come up with a special approach, which says, look, in some cases, it's just too difficult to value intangibles. Like, what's the value of, I don't want to refer to company names because I don't like that, but take a very famous brand. Like, how do you value that brand? Very difficult. There are no comparables. Sometimes they are unique. And if there are comparables, they are also part of a big group. So this information asymmetry between the tax administration on the one hand and the taxpayer may have allowed the taxpayer to play with that and say, actually, I'm transferring my brand, but it has no value. Or think about patent in the pharma industry. Right before they become blockbusters, say, okay, let's sell them to the company in Bermuda. And then the company in Bermuda is now the legal owner, and they're going to exploit the intangible and receive the royalties from all over the world. Over. And conscious of the lack of data, we have also found agreement on new requirements for transfer pricing documentation in the form of a master file which covers the multinational globally and a local file which covers the activities in the country, plus what many refer to as the country-by-country reporting template. So what is this? This is a risk assessment tool. It's one page where basically you take multinational group A, and multinational group A has to tell to the tax administrations of the countries in which it operates, for each country, how many companies it has, how many employees are there, which assets these companies have, which profits they declare, and which taxes they pay. Now imagine what happens if you are the tax director of a group and you are starting to do this because you are forward looking and you know that this will become applicable very soon, and you find out that you have, I don't know, 10,000 employees in India, 5,000 employees in Germany, 2 employees in another jurisdiction that I let you choose, and no employee in a small island in the Caribbean, and 70% of the profits of the group for tax purposes end up in the Caribbean island. That would clearly raise eyebrows. And the tax administration will be able to use this information to direct its audit procedures. And therefore, on the one hand, don't bother those companies that comply with the rules and don't play games. And on the other hand, use efficiently the resources that they have. 3, harmful tax practices. Just to make clear that this is not about bashing multinationals and saying multinationals are bad, they don't pay tax. No, it's a recognition that the rules needed to be updated and that most of the schemes that we have seen in the public domain are legal under current rules. So there is no bashing of multinationals, there is no bashing of governments, but there is a recognition that as governments ask taxpayers to play fair, governments also have to play fair. And so avoid introducing pieces of legislation which are meant to provide a preferential treatment and therefore attract paper profits. There is nothing wrong, according to these guidelines, to provide a preferential treatment to boost certain sectors of the economy. It's a separate type of economic considerations that are not part of these. But what's not acceptable is that you introduce a regime because via that regime you actually want to attract artificially profits that belong to other countries. And what we had seen was the mushrooming of so-called IP boxes, patent boxes. So special regimes that say, you know, if the intangible is in my country, all the royalties that you receive, instead of paying tax at 20%, you pay tax at 4%. Fine if the idea is to promote, to support R&D. But not fine if what you are promoting is that you take the ownership of these intangibles for tax purposes just to put the profits there. And we got there just on time, because IP boxes are coming up everywhere. You may have seen current debate in the United States about, oh, the US also needs that. Well, at least, as a colleague of mine said, we have put a box around the box, so that in order to comply with these guidelines, the preferential treatment needs to require the carrying out of substantial activities on the ground. And second, if governments of countries give certain rulings to taxpayers, and these rulings may have an impact on other countries, they are obliged to give the same ruling to the country so that the other country knows what's happening. You may have heard about a big scandal that has been dubbed as LuxLeaks, where basically a lot of documents from certain firms were leaked showing this practice of ruling, which is a good thing. I always say rulings are like steak knives. Like you can use them to cut a steak, or you can use them to kill someone. It's the same with rulings. They are a very good thing because you give certainty, you give predictability to taxpayers. But when via rulings you provide a preferential treatment in an opaque manner, which affects negatively your neighbors or other countries, then there is something wrong there. Finally, a number of recommendations, best practices, common approaches, however we want to call them, to bridge gaps between and among domestic laws. What has happened in the past has always been that when countries did tax policy, like a lot of it was domestic tax policy without looking at what happened abroad. In the world in which we live today, it's just not possible anymore. So